Hi guys, welcome back to the Geterbrewed channel. Today I'm lucky to have Bill from Rye River Brewing Company with us. So Bill's, he's a friend of mine, he's a friend of the business, very good customer, and he's also a professional brewer, but came from a homebrew background, fair enough to say. So purpose of these little 5 minutes with is to focus on tips for homebrewers at home. So giving back a little bit to the homebrew community and saying to them, you know, yes, it's possible to get into brewing from a homebrew background and also to pick up some tips to make better beer. So your chosen topic is?
Ingredients. Ingredients is really, I think, one of the things that a brewer needs to know and understand and really have confidence in, so that when they come to the task of creating their own recipe, they've got the full arsenal behind them. So for myself, when I started homebrewing, I took a simple approach. I bought the cheapest kit that was going for all grain because I knew I needed to kind of be in control from start to finish. But I started to really focus on, okay, what was my objective with each brew? The first beer I ever brewed was my favorite beer style at the time, which was an American wheat style. But I wanted to just kind of go all in, have a crack at that. But then very quickly it would become, okay, I have an objective in my brewing and I want to get to know these malts. I want to get to know these hops. I want to get to know these yeasts. And I would start to take tasks on in my brew days, sometimes making the day very long for myself and doing side-by-side brews, so that I knew that as they fermented, they were brewed on the same day. I could actually have trials. So I remember back when I started brewing, as opposed to hazy IPAs being a thing, it was all about the IBUs. It was the IBU craze. And so like we were starting to see how hoppy can you make a beer? How bitter actually can you make a beer is a better term. So for example, on that experiment, I brewed a low kind of 20 to 30 IBU version of a recipe, and then I brewed about, I want to say it was like 120 IBU version of the same recipe, because I think at the time, the way we were calculating IBUs, everybody was saying that was kind of where your palate peaked out. Yeah. And then I took that beer to my friends, my colleagues at the time, and handed them all out, and I'd be like, guys, just tell me if you like the red cap or the blue cap. And and it was really interesting because then everybody came back with their feedback, but at the time the feedback was pretty 50-50, which was interesting for me because I would have expected the low IBU one to be the more accessible beer, but palates very much at the time, especially the people who were into craft beer, were kind of leaning towards a bitter, strong beer at the time. Always start your own starter with yeast so you have a good, healthy fermentation. It doesn't need to be complicated. I mean, just having a sterile glass jar and a bit of wort that's been boiled on the go, knock it in there, stir it every once in a while, give yourself a liter of wort. If you don't even have time to do that, when you're mashing through, take some of your first runnings off, maybe dilute it down a bit, boil it, so you can actually throw your yeast in once it's cooled down. It'll grow for an hour or two while you finish out your brew, and you've got a healthier pitch from that little homebrew pitch that you might have started with. And then look at your fermentation temperatures the best you can. It all changes when you're in a brewery and you can control temperature and pressure very accurately. But on the homebrew scale, do what you can. Have a view in mind of what your target is and really play with it. I know it comes to the beers that we release here now are seasonals and all of that, and we don't have the ability, the time frame often to pilot them or do anything like that. So for me as a professional brewer, the biggest thing has been understanding my ingredients so well through all my home brewing days that I can very confidently say, okay, these are the flavor profiles I'm going with. Few years experience in a brewery, and then it's like, okay, these are the efficiencies I'm confident we're going to work with on the brew house, and then you take it together. And you never know, one of those crazy experiments allows you to push something super far later, and you're having fun beers like our seasonals.
When it comes to designing a recipe, you get the blank sheet in front of you and you sit down, what's the first thought? Do you input the base malt? Do you input the percentage? Do you look at what the starting gravity is going to be and how the percentages are going to break down in those malts?
Yeah.
You'd mentioned, IBUs and yeast, but more of the malt bill.
For the grist, for
that?
the malt profile, I work in percentages at that point in time, and then I start to work up towards my ABV target, for example. So yeah, like what we're staring at a brown ale here, I'm not gonna lie, very much so color was at the forefront of that. I think brown ales are great beers. I think they can often be pushed a little too far towards porter and stout territory. It's just a natural thing to do because you want to use these great malts that smell so good when you're mashing them in. Yeah. But you know what I mean? Sometimes you have to take that restrained hand so that you get that lovely color that might be coming through, and just kind of understand your target percentages. Percentages when brewing with things like crystal malts, caramel malts, all of that, they're really key to dial in to your palate because they're strong. They're overpowering very quickly in the brewing process. Biggest compass any brewer could ever use is, does it taste good to you? Yeah. You know what I mean? You look on the internet these days and it's all about a bit of hype, a hype beer, this, that, and the other. And that's great, but sometimes you're drinking those very interesting sounding beers and you're not sure you want to get to the bottom of the glass. I think at the forefront of any brewing is know your ingredients, understand them so that there's a drinkability to the beer that you brew. And that's a big focus for me in my recipe writing.
You were touching on it there. Whenever you're approaching the recipe and you're working on percentages for the malt and you're talking about, the knowing the ingredients, tasting them, understanding them, something I find is a lot of brewers tend to overcomplicate a recipe by trying to bring too many variables in, not through anything other than their desire to make a better beer through lack of experience. So we have a custom grain kit service and we see it's hugely popular, and I watch the guys weighing them out in the warehouse, sometimes with 10, 15 different malts in them. Sometimes you see people with 3. And they're reading the product description of the malt going, this would add a toffee or a raisin note, or this would add a caramel. And maybe they're going, I'd like a bit of toffee and I'd like a bit of caramel, I'd like a bit of raisin. How do you overcome that? Or how do you give a tip to say, where do you find the balance?
Not every brew needs the whole kitchen sink thrown in. So that's a fair point. Tasting everything that you do. When you buy your malts, throw a few of them in your mouth, chew on them, see what that is. If you're really interested in something and you want to push it further, don't be afraid to make a tea with some of your malts and kind of see how it plays out, or a few combinations together. But really for me, it's sensory, it's smell, it's taste. By all means, look at the spec sheets that come with the malt and kind of, recommended usage of something. But by all means, we throw those rules to the wind all the time here at the brewery. But you need to understand, if I was throwing that rule to the wind, I have to understand that I'm pushing that side of that. And I don't necessarily need to throw a bunch under it. So I guess I would really say trial and error. You know what I mean? There's science behind brewing, and you need to pay attention to that. You need to make sure that everything's going to have enough enzymatic power to convert and all of that. You need to look at where you want the body to finish, what the yeast is even able to handle in the first place.
Mash temperatures, things like that as well, taken into consideration. Water profile is something that I've been saying to people as well,
Get the biggest thing as a home brewer, get the chlorine out of there. Don't even waste your time brewing a single home brew with water that came out of your tap unless you've found a way to dechlorinate it, because that's just going to put you on the back foot in the first place. And then past that, start to understand your salts and mineral additions if you can. But really,
do it in stages as well.
That's
important. We're throwing a lot of stuff at you here, but this is it's gold. What I'm saying, these guys are talking to a home brewer that's turned into a head brewer, and also a very highly decorated head brewer.
But taste. Taste is everything. For me, my palate's led me through this whole journey, but I would say when you're brewing it with a yeast, if you've got good sterile techniques at home, don't be afraid to sample your beers from your wort through to the beginning of fermentation, the middle of fermentation, the end of fermentation, smell things. Look, it's all about how it's coming across your palate. You start to brew with that same yeast or that same malt time and time again, you're going to see the commonalities, and you're going to understand what you want to push or don't want to push.
Dry hopping techniques. I can't leave here without asking you about dry hopping techniques. Miami J, for example,
Cool.
One of the best IPAs being produced. What tips would you give to the guys in relation to
Dry hopping's a lot of fun. Obviously, when it comes to hops, there's a lot being learned about the different oils and oil compounds that are found in beers today. So you want to utilize that. Different strains react to these yeast strains, react to oil compounds in different ways. So a beer like Miami J, we are definitely focusing on biotransformation a bit in the process. Some of our beers here though, not at all. You know, France's Big Bangin', award-winning West Coast IPA, not worried about it at all. So again, it depends what you're focusing on. In terms of it though, like look, hops, the oils have flash points, so the later and later they go in the boil, if you're not relying on them for bitterness, isomerization, then keep that in mind. In a whirlpool, especially in a homebrew scenario, your temperature in a whirlpool is very different than my temperature in a whirlpool, but what you can achieve from hops and their oils at different temperatures is key and is worth reading up on. So read up on flash points, read up on isomerization points, which is probably around 79, 80 degrees. So read up on pasteurization in case you want to take something below that, so you're understanding that you still have a stable product before you pitch your yeast, in case you want to keep some of those oils that flash around there, in there. And then dry hopping, look, don't be afraid to get some hops in during fermentation. Again, especially if you're home brewing, like you don't have maybe the ways to make sure that there's no oxygen pickup in grist when you do a hop addition. So if your yeast is still active and still fermenting, it's going to be able to scrub that away. Look, you're not going to get the autolysis because of the pressure on the yeast and all of that. So by all means, you've got some time to enjoy those hops in there, but also be ready to, if you're putting your hops in, be ready to either end up racking that beer or end up getting it to package pretty quick so that you're not just letting it turn into a vegetable stew.
We've probably went way over the 5 minutes with Bill, but really appreciate your time. Thanks so much. And until next time, happy brewing.
Cheers, guys.